Hi, I'm John Niehaus, Director of Program Development for the National Association of Flight Instructors. I'd like to welcome you to our second episode of the NAFI 10 Question Challenge. Our previous episode was Captain Brian Schiff, and our guest today is NAFI Chairman, CFI, MEI, CFII, Bob Mader. He's a close personal friend of mine and someone who I truly look up to. I've known for quite a while now. And I'm really excited to have him. Just some accomplishments. He was 2009 St. Louis CFI of the Year, 2010 Lincoln FSDO CFI of the Year, and he's also a lifetime member with NAFI. Now, if you don't remember, the whole point of the NAFI 10 Question Challenge is to ask, as you would think, 10 questions to each guest. And what I'd like to do is just be able to use this as a project to take these questions and answers from each of the guests and figure out where the commonalities are and figure out what makes being a CFI so important to success in personal lives and in professional careers, and just see why it makes everyone who comes in contact with it better. At least in my opinion, it does. So without further ado, I welcome you to our second episode with Bob Mader.
Hi, Bob. Thanks for joining us for episode 2.
Hi, glad to be here. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to jump right into it. And our first question here is, how long have you been a certified flight instructor?
I've been a flight instructor since 2001.
Okay. So that would equate to 19 years?
A little bit more than 19 years. It was in the spring of 2001 when I got my certificate.
Okay. Was flight instruction part of your original plan, or was it sort of something that you kind of stumbled upon and liked?
Stumbled upon, I think, although that brings up kind of an odd picture. I started out, I wanted to learn how to fly. I became obviously a private pilot, went on to the instrument, and said, well, let's get better. Got my commercial, and next thing I knew, I looked up, I was a multi-engine flight instructor. It just seemed just to keep evolving that way.
Mm-hmm. And so how long did that take you then?
Oh, all the way up to the double I, or to the MEII. I got that in, 2004? I started flying in I got my certificate my private certificate in 1994. And then I got my, the last flight instructor rating was the multi-engine rating, and that was in 2004. I built up a lot of time between getting my instrument in August of 2001, getting my instrument instructor certificate or rating in 2001 to, excuse me, to the multi-engine in 2004.
Okay. So reflecting on your instructor skills with that very first student that you had, how well do you think you did?
Oh, I was a terrible instructor. I was horrible. At least in my opinion. He thought I did a good job. He kept saying thank you, but wow, it's the old, if I'd known then what I know now, it certainly would have been a different experience for him. Unfortunately, it's as much as you can be taught by your mentors and by good instructors and the people around you, all you can do is find your own voice as you instruct.
Which is easier said than done.
It's very much easier said than done, yes.
So most of us have had a instructor mentor that's kind of helped us along the way. Who was yours, and what was the most meaningful thing they taught you?
Well, I had several mentors. I was very fortunate here in the St. Louis area. There were a lot of very talented instructors. My primary mentor was Rick Albrecht, who I've mentioned in the magazine a couple of times. He and I became very close during the process, and from instrument up through the MEII. And I think the most important thing he taught me was this. During my instrument, no, I'll take it to a different place. During getting my instructor rating, there was a lot of cash going out the door. There's no two ways to say it. And I remember saying to him, I don't know how I'm going to do this or finance this. I just don't know if I can do it. And he took me aside and said, well, if you say it that way, you'll never accomplish it. You will never finish getting your rating. But if you say, I'll find a way, you'll figure it out. And I've taken that not just in aviation, but to a lot of different places in my life. That's probably the single most important thing that I learned from Rick.
And that's a question that a lot of students have in every degree of their flight training is, oh my gosh, it's not a cheap way to go, but it's certainly worth it.
Yes, it is. It's absolutely been worth it. I wouldn't trade a second of time or experience that I've had.
So what was the most valuable non-aviation skill you've learned from being a flight instructor?
Learning to understand how to read other people and what truly is helping them learn, and seeing what makes them nervous, what makes them apprehensive, and more importantly, what makes them happy. You can't change another person's emotions. It's up to them to do that. But seeing how what I do or what we do as instructors, how that affects another person, and how we say things, has been a very valuable skill in everything that I do.
Agreed. What do you enjoy most about flight instructing then?
I'm not going to lie. There's a selfish motivation. I like seeing the houses and trees get small. I love to fly. So that's certainly a part of it. I think the thing that I enjoy the most is sharing that with another person and saying, see, if I can do it, you can do it. It's a lot of fun taking somebody out and showing them how to fly the airplane, how to apply what they're learning to flying the airplane, to showing them that they're capable of doing things. In short, sharing what I enjoy with another person. It's just a hoot. It's so much fun to see somebody's eyes light and go, oh, yeah, cool.
Especially when it's a difficult topic and they've been struggling with it for multiple days, and all of a sudden they finally just go, oh man, I get it now.
Just very recently, the most fun I've had is another instructor came to me with a student of his whose language skills are that English is a second language for that individual. And so there's a lot of apprehension surrounding controlled airspace, towered airports in particular. So I worked with the controller and with the student, and I told the controller, there's a nice airport with parallel runways, Spirit of St. Louis. And I told the controller, point blank on the radio, he's got to get used to talking to you guys. Do what you want with him. And making him do all the radio communications, and making's too harsh a word, but encouraging him, here, you do it. You figure it out. The airport's not too busy. The controller's willing to help. Just talk.
Mm-hmm.
Just talk to the controller. You two will sort it out. I'll make sure nothing bad happens. And between the controller and me, we'll keep the operation safe. Just sort it out. And watching him in one lesson, in one hour lesson at a towered airport, go from I'm not happy talking to the controller to, oh, is that all there is to it? Was just a lot of fun.
Oh yeah. So what is the most interesting or scary or fun story that you have from your flight instruction experience?
Well, if the people watching this Google my last name, if they're AOPA members, they'll see some articles that I sold AOPA. And one of them was about a young lady who's working on her private. We'd flown from St. Louis up to Springfield, Illinois. And it was her night cross country. And it was a beautiful, dark night. Perfect for instructing. High stratus layer, no moon, no horizon. This is what it's like to fly at night.
Mm-hmm.
As Ernest Gann once said, it was darker than the inside of a cow. And so we flew up there and she did fine. And I threw all the hypothetical emergencies at her. The engine fails here. What do we do? Where are we going to go? Who are you going to tell? All that other stuff. And what are your alternates? And what if you fly into a cloud at night that you couldn't see, and et cetera, all that fun stuff. We land, we top off the tanks and had a quick snack, and then we head back to Spirit. And for this to make sense, call up the sectional chart of, or the terminal area chart for Spirit for St. Louis. We're just coming up to the confluence of the Missouri and Mississippi River. And on the flight back, she had noticed that typical of an older 172 was drawing a little bit heavily from the left tank. So she flipped the fuel selector to the right tank. And the important thing to know is that this was an older 172, not one of the new ones, where there's 4 positions to the fuel valve. And we're getting ready to land at Spirit. As I said, we're in the darkest part of St. Charles County, Missouri, right above the confluence of the Mississippi and Missouri rivers at the Illinois border. And she said, fuel to both. And she reached between the seats, and I didn't pay any attention. She said, fuel to both, turn the tank, turn the lever, the valve, and everything seemed fine. And I think it was about 20 seconds later, the engine just flat died. Just wound down to a stop. And to her credit, she went right to the emergency procedures we've been trained to do. She didn't care about the class Bravo above our heads. She started pitching for best glide. And yes, that would result in a climb. She started looking for a place to land the airplane. And meantime, I'm looking out the window. We're just far enough away from St. Charles County that we weren't going to make that runway. And I'm thinking about all the farm fields and all the power lines and everything below us and the power lines across the Mississippi River. I'm thinking this is not going to be good in the dark. And this all took place in about less than a half a second. I remember saying something very intelligent to her that translated out, "Oh my goodness gracious, you turned off the silly fuel." Maybe it wasn't quite said that way, but it wasn't said harshly. Anyway, I reached between the seats, turned the fuel to both, and the propeller was windmilling and the magnetos were still on. And about 2 seconds later, maybe longer, seemed like about a lifetime. Yeah. The engine came back and roared to life, and we continued on to Spirit of St. Louis. And I think the really scary part for me wasn't, are we going to crash the airplane? Are we going to flip over and all this other stuff? No, I was trying to figure out how to explain to my friends in the St. Louis FSDO how I put a perfectly good 172 in the Mississippi River. So we both learned a lot from that one, and it was a lot of fun. And the upshot was, she looked at me and said, after we landed, she says, "Guess we have to do that flight over again. I blew it." And I go, "No, we made it up to Springfield, and we made it back, and we both learned a lot."
Well,
give me the logbook, and I'm going to sign it, and we're done.
Only a seasoned instructor can watch the prop stop, look down at the fuel selector, and go, "Oh, that was fun. Let's just turn this the other way," instead of getting all nervous and excited about it. Just very nonchalant.
Well, speaking of mentors, that was one of the things that my mentors had told me. If you just did something and something bad happens, undo what you just did. Mm-hmm. That's the first thing that came to my mind.
It reminds me a little bit of airline training, where they said every emergency is either a 1-sip or 2-sip problem. 1 sip of coffee as you think about what might have happened. And if it's really not that big of a deal, you take a 2nd sip so that you don't overreact and do something to completely make it worse.
There you go. Exactly.
So, all right. So what aspect of flight training best prepared you for other aspects of your professional life, whether it be your previous career or your time as NAFI chairman?
This is one of my favorite topics. It's fundamentals of instruction. So many inexperienced flight instructors struggle with that because it's not hardware. It's all soft science. It's not hard science. It's soft science. You can't. The testing people will argue with me from left to right about this, but I disagree a little bit. It's very difficult to measure another human being. I'll give them that much. Okay. but it's understanding how to read another person. It's understanding the motivations of other people. Now, that's something we all learn growing up, okay? We all have brothers, sisters, siblings, and if we're all a reasonable human being, we've all learned how to read other people and how to work with them or exist with them in a society. What the fundamentals of instruction did was help clarify and, for lack of a better term, codify that in my mind. Knowing consciously as an instructor that a person can't learn or act in a reasonable way if they're frightened for their own safety.
Mm-hmm.
Helped inform how I train people and how I deal with other people. Understanding that people want to be recognized. And again, we all know that intuitively, instinctively, but having that spelled out explicitly and really understanding that. And I'm saying this as somebody who has a bachelor's in psychology. This is stuff I learned in college. But this is a practical application of that knowledge in a real world environment, which is carried over to other places.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the FOI is something that always seems that people don't take seriously until after they start needing it, and they go, "Oh, okay, that was really important, possibly even more important than a lot of the other things that we talked about."
Well, one of the things, if I may here, for just go back to flight instruction for a moment, and for the newer instructors in our group or the people studying to be an instructor, this is what I tell my CFI candidates. The commercial certificate proved you knew how to fly an airplane. Yes, we'll have to train you to fly from the other seat. It's not, but that doesn't take that terribly long. That's not what's important, other than safety of flight. Yes, obviously it's important. You have to be able to demonstrate and all that. Don't get me wrong. But the real upshot of learning to be an instructor is how to take all this great knowledge that you have, that you've gained, and you'd be surprised how much, even as a relatively low-time pilot, how much you've learned. And again, take all of that great stuff and impart it to another person. That's what's really important in learning to be a flight instructor, and that's why the FOI is so important.
Well, and on top of that, you once told me it's important to know those things, but it's also important to know what you don't know and be able to admit that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's so much about aviation and many other things in life that I don't know. And you have to be able to embrace that. You actually have to own that and say, okay. For example, I don't have any turbine ratings. Okay. Now I know the principles of turbine flight. Yes, I've done a lot of reading. Does that qualify me to sit in the right seat of a Lear or not hardly? Not hardly at all.
Well, and I think that it imparts a admirable vulnerability with your students, where when they ask you a question you don't know, instead of trying to make something up or get as close to the right answer as possible, admitting, hey, why don't we go look at it together? And now you're teaching that skill of how to investigate those answers and where to find them.
That and this is something you and I have talked about quite a bit, and I'm glad you reminded me of it. Being able to say, I don't know, I don't understand it myself, let's go discover it. It shows that you're secure enough in yourself that you can be trusted.
Mm-hmm.
That you are willing to go the extra mile to help your student figure things out and to learn from the experience. I will argue that I've learned about as much from my students as they've learned from me, whether it's about teaching techniques, other human beings, or sometimes a bit of knowledge I never had. There's always that obscure question where you look at them and go, oh, well, gee, I've never run into this before. Let's start digging.
And students are masters of making that like the first question that they ask you, and then you go into the ground going, oh gosh, I don't know that answer. That's not the best way to start this off, but let's go find out.
Well, and the tendency, especially when you're an inexperienced flight instructor, the tendency is to want to look like you know it all. You can't. And as I tell everybody, the second I think I know everything there is about flying is the second I cut up all three of my certificates, because I have a UAS certificate also. I cut all three certificates in half and put them in an envelope and mail them back to Oak City. That just means my ego's gotten in the way.
So final question. If you could give a new instructor one piece of advice, key to success, if you will, what would that be?
I think we touched on it here. Be proud of what you've accomplished, but not be satisfied with what you've learned. Took a lot of hard work to become a flight instructor. There's no two ways about it. It's a long road, relatively long road. Whether you do it as an avocation, which is what I've done in my life. I had a career outside of aviation, but this is a passion that I've had to teach. Or whether you do it as a career step towards an airline or a corporate career, or if you want to make it a full-time profession. Always strive to be better at what you do. Be very proud of what you've accomplished. Continue to improve, I think, is the most important thing. And be humble enough to say there's always more to learn. Don't forget, even the best test pilots in the world have to go to school to be test pilots.
I think that's great advice. And with that, there you have it. Episode 2 of NAFI's 10-question challenge is complete. Thank you so much for your time, Bob.
Oh, glad to do it. Really appreciate you asking me to talk.
And for those of you out there, again, this is just the first of many. There will be more challenges to be featured shortly, and you can view them on our social media pages, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and we'd love to have you. www.nafinet.org is the website, and thank you again.